practice project presentation discussing COVID-19 development in infants. To start off, the reason that I chose this topic is because I'm a postpartum nurse. I've always been interested in working with children, especially infants. I graduated with my bachelor's from Penn State in 2020, the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. Although it was tough navigating being a new nurse and working in healthcare, it taught me a lot. It also fostered curiosity in me to learn more about the disease and how it impacts the population I care for. In the beginning of the pandemic, not much was known about the disease. Although more research is developing, there are still some mysteries surrounding the infant population. As someone who strongly believes in natural remedies, I wanted to see if diet plays a role in an infant developing COVID-19, which is why I decided to investigate the impact of a formula-fed diet versus an all breast milk diet. The picture on the right is also a photo of me and one of my best friends that I work with in our infant population. A consent was signed to get this picture, but we dressed them up as pumpkins in onesies for Halloween, and I thought this was just a cute photo to share. This curiosity led me to develop my PICO question. In infants, which is the population, how does breastfeeding, the intervention, compared to formula feeding, the comparison, affect the risk of developing COVID-19, which would be the outcome, within the first year of life, and that's the time frame. For my search strategy, I used two main databases, PubMed or Medline and CINAHL. For the most part, my articles were found via PubMed. The key terms I used were developing COVID-19 pertaining to the outcome of my PICO question, breastfeeding signifying the intervention, formula feeding related to the comparison, and finally infants for the population I am investigating. The limiters that were used to narrow the search process were language, human subjects, age, and publication date range. Of course, the language that I chose was English, considering that is my primary language. I limited the search to human subjects, given that I am investigating the human infant population and wanted a direct comparison. Thirdly, I limited the age group to be birth to 23 months, which is generally known to be the infant population. Finally, I selected a publication date range within the last 5 years, considering the time frame of the pandemic and interest in the most up-to-date information. Pictured here is a screenshot of a chart containing the numbers yielded from my search in PubMed. The far right column shows the results of each keyword individually, while the combination yield at the bottom shows the results of combining the keywords together. As you can see, the combination yield for the four major parts of the question was only 2. This should have been a warning sign for me to alter my search process or refine my PICO question, given such little evidence, but this actually served as the learning opportunity early on in the project. Since I was only able to generate 2 results from my search, I decided to take a look at the results generated from sections of the question. For example, the P and I results, the P and O results, and so on. Now I will briefly describe the 5 articles I felt were most helpful in answering my PICO question. As you will see in the slides to come, I will go through the purpose, design, sample, and setting, and findings of each article. Concluding the description of the articles, I will synthesize the information I have found. To begin, the first article analyzed whether breast milk is a vehicle of infection for COVID-19 and the outcomes of infants born to mothers currently diagnosed with the disease. The article was a prospective, collaborative, observational study with a sample size of 14 breastfeeding mothers. The study was performed in Northwest Italy over a 3-month span. After analyzing the breast milk of COVID-19 positive mothers, researchers discovered 13 out of 14 samples were negative. In relation to the outcome of the infants, 4 neonates were positive while 10 were negative for the disease. Of the 10 neonates, 9 were breastfed and 1 formula fed, concluding that breast milk is an unlikely vehicle of infection for COVID-19. The purpose of Article 2 was to discover the association between maternal COVID-19 infection and the infant immune response in the first 2 months of life. The study was a prospective cohort study that analyzed 21 COVID-19 positive mothers and their 22 newborns, with one set being twins. The study took place in Rome, Italy over a 5-month span. Findings concluded that infants receiving breast milk during the first 2 months of life had an increase in IgA antibody levels compared to formula-fed infants. An increase in IgA antibody levels is helpful considering this type of antibody protects mucosal tissue from invasion of harmful diseases such as COVID-19. Article 3 analyzed the state and frequency of COVID-19 in breast milk to determine if it is a vehicle of infection for an infant. This study was an observation cohort study that looked at the breast milk of 110 women currently diagnosed with COVID-19. The study was performed in San Diego, California over a 6-month time period. The results of the study were that COVID-19 was rarely found in the breast milk of the mothers, and that breast milk is an unlikely source of disease in the infant. The study did state that a longitudinal follow-up of the infants was performed, but no further detail was provided. Article 4 was a systematic review that examined the success of current well-known practices in preventing transmission of COVID-19 from mother to infant. Some of the practices including isolating the infant from the mother and bottle feeding rather than breastfeeding. The review examined 28 studies that totaled 190 breastfed infants and 152 bottle-fed infants. The result was that 22% of breastfed infants tested positive for COVID-19, and only 2.63% of bottle-fed infants tested positive for the disease. This is an interesting finding considering previous articles emphasized the safety of breastfeeding when a mom is COVID-19 positive. The final article, Article 5, was a retrospective analysis that estimated the prevalence and determined the risk factors for infant COVID-19 infection. The study was performed in China over a 6-month span. 221 newborns born to COVID-19 positive mothers were analyzed. The study mainly looked at whether the practice of rooming in and breastfeeding impacted the health of the newborn. In conclusion, 18.79% of the infants that were rooming in and breastfeeding contracted COVID-19, while only 1.79% of those not breastfed and separated from their mother contracted the disease. This supports the findings of the previous study that breastfeeding might play a role in the contraction of COVID-19 in infants. When synthesizing the research, there were a number of themes that emerged. The themes included vehicles of infection for COVID-19, clinical outcomes of infants born to COVID-19 positive mothers, the benefits of breast milk for infants, and the maternal and infant immune responses. Although each article had a different presentation of these themes, they all encompassed the 4 ideas listed here. There were a number of similarities between each of the articles. Similarities included the use of small sample sizes, samples that were all within the same location, and analysis of infants under 1 year of age and born to COVID-19 positive mothers. I consider the use of small sample sizes in participants from the same location to be a big drawback, since the information might not be applicable to the majority of the population. Although each article did state the demographics of the participants, I believe further research should be done to include a greater number of individuals. The major differences found between the articles were inconsistent infant follow-up windows, confounding variables, and conflicting results. The inconsistency in infant follow-up windows was not a major drawback, considering the time frame of my PICO question was within the first year of life. This is a pretty large time frame to consider, and each study analyzed infants up to 1 year of age, as mentioned in the previous slide. Unfortunately, some of the studies did have confounding variables that make the results unclear. For example, some of the studies analyzed rooming in and breastfeeding together, so there's no distinct conclusion of whether the breast milk caused the infection in the infant or the rooming in and airborne exposure. Finally, after looking at all the studies together, there are conflicting results. Some studies concluded that breast milk from a COVID-19 positive mother is not a risk to the infant, while other studies proposed that it could be. After taking into consideration each study, I believe there are three major points that can be applied to clinical practice. The first is that breast milk is still the most beneficial nutrient source for an infant. Although it is inconclusive whether COVID-19 is passed through the breast milk, it is clear that breast milk does provide many benefits when it comes to building a baby's immune system. Second, as mentioned in previous slides, it is unclear whether or not COVID-19 is contracted from the breast milk or from airborne particles. So it should be the general practice that COVID-19 positive mothers practice general safety measures such as hand washing, masking, and social distancing. Results are unclear, but rooming in is still considered a recommended practice to promote maternal-infant bonding. In conclusion, there is no true link between breastfeeding and the risk of developing COVID-19 in infants. As mentioned, the standard COVID-19 precautions should be used in any situation where an active infection is present. According to the World Health Organization, breastfeeding is still a recommended practice regardless of infection status due to the benefits outweighing any potential risks for the infant. And then finally, here are all the references that I have used throughout this presentation. I hope you enjoyed.